Welcome back for another book review. Today we are talking, if I got it the correct way, about this one. So this is the Hearth Witch's Garden Herbal Plants, Recipes, and Rituals for Healing and Magical Self-Care by Anna Franklin. So this is part of a series. It's the Hearth Witch's whatever series. It's on the back here. I don't know that I'm gonna read those, to be honest. I didn't really like this one. So I've got a few points for this book that I want to make sure I talk about, but the basic premise of this book I think comes down to I don't really like the author. I don't really like how she writes. I don't like the way she talks to you. I just don't think we jive together as author to reader relationship. It's not it for me. It might be for other people, but for me, I didn't like the way she was presenting information. I didn't like the way she was talking. It wasn't clicking for me. The information is okay. It's not the greatest, but it's not the worst. It's a lot that we'll get into, but overall, I don't know. It's not the book I would recommend. If you're into herbs, there's better books. Green witchery is just one of those topics that I've found tends to be honestly kind of the worst when you're trying to find a good book. Like, there is just so many bad books in comparison to good ones. And maybe it's just my own experience, but I really haven't had a lot of great experiences with them. I've had one or two good ones, but that's about it. And this was not one of those. So this book, let's just jump into the points. So the first thing is it's super preachy on the front of being eco-conscious. You are constantly guilted for existing. How we constantly live our lives is just terrible. And it's just she has so many really dumb examples, but one in particular really stood out to me. She was talking about your tools that you use in your yard and how you shouldn't use them, and the gas powered ones are so bad, which granted, they're not as big of a deal anymore. Most people are moving to electronic anyways for their tools. It's either a plug-in or a battery. Most of the tools you're gonna find at your regular hardware store for yard stuff that the average person will use is going to be a battery-based one. You don't I'm sure they still sell gasoline ones, but they're not as common because they're a pain to deal with. But she talks about how horrible the emissions are from it, and it's you realize that existing, right? To use electricity and things, it's also gonna pollute, and the reality is that most pollution is coming from corporations, not individuals. Talk to the corporations, boycott them, make them be better people. Stop guilting the average person just trying to maintain their yard. Just this constant trying to guilt you and fearmonger you, it got old really, really fast, and instantly I disliked the author from that point forward. The next thing is that this book isn't exactly for beginners, but in a way it kind of is, but in a way it kind of isn't. And so one of the things is that this author just constantly and randomly mentions bits and pieces of spiritual practices with no reference. And again, it's a newer pet peeve of mine, but I'm really starting to get annoyed by it. And it's when it just says, Native American belief. There are different tribes. Which tribes? It could be multiple, that's totally fine. Which ones? Or are you just generalizing to generalize because you didn't actually do any research? That's what it's starting to feel like to me. Because, again, I don't know a lot about the tribes and the different beliefs, but I know they're different. And I would imagine tribes from the East Coast, the Middle, and the West Coast, even up and down, it's gonna be different. We have different climates and they're native, so it's gonna be very tied to the landscapes. So I know it's gonna be different. I know it's gonna be different. I'm sure it is. Even here, I've learned about a few of the tribes that exist here in the Utah region, and they're different. So it's a random pet peeve when they the author just casually is it's a Native American belief, and you're but which one? You just said regionally, a Southwest Native American belief, sure. But we're a very big country. To just generalize, it's a new pet peeve of mine. I know, but it's getting there. But she does this with a lot of different beliefs. And like the one that I wrote down was moving along the web of weird. And it's like, a beginner is not gonna know what the F you're talking about. Like, unless they've studied like Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, Nordic, general just regions, like, you know, the Norse people, you're not gonna know what the web of weird is. You're not even gonna know why. What is that? Don't know. And like, there's no explanation. And this is the example I wrote down from the book, but there's a lot of these in here. And it was like, why aren't you explaining anything? Like, at all. Who's your target audience? Are we aiming at intermediate who should know these things? Just seems weird not to mention it like at all. So the next thing is that the spells in this book are super basic. So the ones that I wrote down was the bonfire spell. You put a paper in fire to get rid of something, and it's like, wow, definitely haven't read that before, which made me contemplate, is this really for an intermediate or is this for beginner? That's a very beginner spell. And then the next one was downright laughable to me, which was the spell to encourage rats and mice to leave. This traditional spell is worth a try. Chant, rats and mice, leave this poor man's house. Go away over to the mill and there you'll get your fill. Which was like, what? What kind of logic is this to get rid of like pests? That's not gonna work at all. And like, we have 4 cats and a dog. I can guarantee you that's not gonna work. Even with these guys, it doesn't work. We still have a lot of pests. And like, the phrase is like also not great. Leave this poor person's house. Like, why are you calling yourself poor? Or another person poor? Like, they very well could be, but that just, I didn't like that verbiage. And like, over to the mill. Where is your nearest mill? And like, the author is very obviously not from the US. And so like, maybe that's more of a thing over there. I don't know. But here there's not like a lot of mills just like there. Like, a lot of us are going to be suburban to urban witches. Not a lot of people are going to be in rural areas where like you will probably find mills. That's just not a thing. So like, that felt weird. And like, also, why are you sending them to a mill? Like, they're going to murder these things because that's going to cut into their business. So like, with the eco-conscious things that you're mentioning at the beginning, that feels weird to push. And like, it was really dumb, honestly, of a spell. And I'm like, why? When I include a spell in any of my work, like, I don't know, I feel like the spells should not be so silly, personally. Also, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but there's just like a lot of fear-mongering in this book. So one example that I wrote down is, never use an aluminum or copper pan as it can react with the brew and taint it. But it doesn't have a problem when you're cooking normal foods in it. Like, there's no rhyme or reason why. Like, is it specific herbs that are going to counteract with it? Because if so, why aren't we warned about that when we're cooking? Like, it's just random stuff like that that the author just doesn't explain. Like, just don't use these. And it's like, why? You haven't said why. Because like, most of the ingredients, like if you make soup, you're gonna add a lot of random stuff. And like, not everyone is gonna cook in like a ceramic pot. And maybe, I mean, most of the, I don't know, like, are you gonna use like stainless steel to cook in? Or are you like, why? It doesn't really explain it. And like, again, if you're not going to explain a lot of the reasons why and like explain it outside of just in witchcraft, that's gonna bother me. So a lot of the recipes in this book also don't tell you what herbs to use, which is really, really weird. Like, it just says, cut up your fresh herbs, or make an herbal infusion or decoction with your chosen herb. What herbs? It never tells you. It never tells you any of them. So this next one really solidified and like dropped it a star, because initially it was going to be a 3-star book. This dropped it to a 2. All right, so here we are on page 77. This is under deity correspondences. Various religions have assigned specific plants to different gods and used them in worship of those deities or associated them in mythology. Where I have assigned gods and goddesses to herbs, it is because those plants were connected with those particular deities, either in their mythology or worship. They are not arbitrarily assigned as they are in many books. Okay. Like, the author has such a high horse and just like these snide little remarks here and there. Hard pass, not for me. So this next point is one that I've mentioned quite a bit, and it's a personal one that I don't know that everyone's going to feel the same way, which is fine, but it's where I'm at. So she does include a decent amount of like heads up on this plant. Great, love that. A lot of the Green Witch books don't. Of, you know, the warnings of like, hey, if you're on this medication or if you're pregnant, probably don't use these. Really good to include those. The next thing though is that if you were going to tell somebody how to make wine, and there are entire books on how to make wine at home, and you write it in a paragraph, I question things, because things can go bad very easily and you can create something very toxic and it will kill you. So like, I'm just not a big fan where, again, there are huge step-by-step things of how to make wine, to make sure it's safe, to make sure you have all of the correct equipment, how to use the equipment, all this stuff, and these books just casually tell you to make alcohol on your own at home. I think that's a bit of a dangerous thing. I don't trust authors that include that information. I really think that you need to go to somebody who actually does that for a living, who has written a full book on the topic, to really know what you're doing, because it can go bad so easily and you can really hurt yourself and the people around you. And the last thing is another personal peeve of mine. There's no conclusion. I hate books that don't have a conclusion. I feel like you just got bored with the book and you decided to be done with it and you didn't write a conclusion. It could just be a page, but no. Couldn't do that. So that also annoys me quite a bit. So anyways, overall, obviously, I didn't love this book. I'm probably not going to read any more from this author. And yeah, this video is getting long enough as it is. So anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Huge thank you to my patrons. If you want to check out my Patreon, it is linked down below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I post Monday through Friday. And until next time, thank you so much for watching, and bless be. And last but not least, Office Cat says hellos. Hi. Hi, little murder paws. Isn't she so precious? She says we'll see you all soon.